Disclaimer. The information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GANs processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
Okay. Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for participating in this session. This is the Keshe American Knowledge Team gatherings. And we gather every Sunday in this very important event. And the reason for it is because we're bringing together many continents that are come together to discuss the findings that we get every week from Mr. Kesh and see if we can understand it. So please fasten your seatbelts because we are entering a new era. We are in the post-Sanya conference era. As we all understand now, it was a truly fabulous watershed moment. And this is the Kesh Foundation Spaceship Institute Teachings on Plasma Science. Yes, we're carrying on. We are discussing basic transition. Today's subject is X-axis orbitals. My name is Alexander. I am from Canada. It is April 21st, 2024.
The 14th, I think it is, but no problem.
But,
one day
yeah.
blends into the next without a problem.
Well, that is totally unacceptable. How does that happen?
I guess you looked at the wrong date, which I've done many, many times, Alex.
How is that? The marvels of graphics. And it's April 14th, 2024. This is the Kesh Foundation North America Plasma Education Series. So let's not race too far into the future. We are continuing on a basic series that we started 4 years ago. And we've gone through various sessions. Just a quick review. The last session was the basic transmission series, and we looked at the x-axis dimension, perpendicular rotation, perpendicular motion, field capture, nearness, and field release. And so today we're looking at basic transition, which is now a continuation because we're trying to condense the thousands of hours of teaching and make it easy for newcomers to get introduced and kind of follow the pattern, and also helpful of the mature students to be able to explain things in their own way, the new developments that are coming along. Terminology is a really important thing. Not only do words have meanings, but these meanings mean different things in different contexts. And so we're going to introduce a little bit of confusion today because we're going to be talking about x-axis orbitals. And later on, we'll be introducing other subjects to carry on this basic transition series. So as we move along, we understand that we're still stuck on this hesitancy highway and, you know, what we call the donkey technology, because that's at the lowest energy state. And, you know, that makes us feel good, right? It gives us that warm and fuzzy feeling. But it's not always the same for everybody. For many, life is hard. And so we say, well, life gets a lot easier when you get up on the horse. And so we just have to exercise a lot of caution because as we move ahead into outer space, which we've never been into, things could get a little bit nostalgic. And I think we all understand that because the gravitation towards the nostalgic is always to a point of pleasure and good memories. In book number 1, Mr. Marin Tovakolikesh described the universal order of creation of matter. And in book number 2, he described the structure of the light. And in book number 3, the origin of the universe. 3 very important subjects that have, for most people, no relevance, except for the fact that they were born. But that's a minor point, because as we're seeing, in many cases, people underestimate the value of life and have no respect with respect to it. Well, when we're booking these transmutation training sessions, we have set up a framework of 6 months to do some initial preparation. And this month we will be going through the next session on April the 19th. It may be delayed another week, but the thing is that that'll be the 4th session of this transmutation. And like school, you don't have to go through every class. And if you miss some classes, it doesn't matter. You can join at any time, and you're welcome to do it because none of us is a master at this. We are in uncharted territory. And one of the real uncharted territories is peace on this planet, peace on a world scale. And we've been trying for 321 weeks in a row to deliver this through our One Planet, One Nation, One Race for Justice seminars that have been every Tuesday. And we keep going. And the reason for it is because we are helping the members of the Universal Council to do what the members of the Universal Nations is failing to do. And we are in the process of searching for outer space, but we need to get on that plasma highway to that little pie in the sky. But there is a beyond, and there is a bigger pie. And our universe is just that tiny little red dot in the bottom right-hand corner. And proportionately, when we're looking at the rest of the universe, we see that there's a long way to go. And there's a lot of go to. So understanding the structure of light becomes really, really important because that helps us to get from here to there. And of course, we need to pick up the speed. Sure, riding a horse is faster than walking, but you know, until we get to the plasma highway, this is going to drag on. And we are really, in some cases, we're very close. But generally, as a population, we're still on the transmission highway and still having difficulty understanding that. So now we're exploring the transition highway because we have to elevate and we should go step by step. And the reason for that is because it's a lot easier to go 1 step at a time than 2 steps at a time. But it also has to do with stability. It also has to do with choice. It has to do with direction, and it has to do with everyone that's on this planet. So what is the transition highway? And so we're beginning this series to discuss this, because what we were faced with in the transmission series is this universe embodiment range, right? So we got a little tiny perfect world, and we look at the rest of the universe and we say, well, how are we going to get there? So, it would really be a lot easier if we could travel at the speed of light. And since the speed of light is purported to be the fastest transmission, and we wondered if that was true, well, it doesn't look like that's true. And then, of course, to travel to the everything that we see, which is pretty big compared to ourselves, because it's pretty big compared to our Earth, and we're just a speck of dust on the Earth, as the satellite pictures tell us. And so to go faster and to achieve that size, it means maybe we have to get bigger as we go faster. Well, I would say please check your baggage in, because we have a new universe embodiment pie chart. So the question then changes: is the speed of light a constant transmission? And is the universe composed only 70% of hydrogen? And if that is true, and you are here, are you in the 70%? Are you in the 30%? And can we map this out? Well, maybe what we'll have to do is just have what we call a MAGRAV pie chart, and say, well, you're either in matter state or you're in antimatter state. And the question then becomes is, how do you transition from here or to here? And is there a map? So we have gravitational confirmation that hydrogen does exist. Isn't that interesting? And where did that come from? And so because it arrived and it has a spectrum, then we know that it's gravitational. Okay, well, this is good. And so when we talk about the creation of the universe, we see that it exists from energy. And so this energy is always in motion. So therefore, that motion has a charge, because the energy is positive. So the difference in the charge is the direction of motion. In other words, did something come or did something leave? And if it did either one of those things, then it had to engage something else. So all things are working in combination. And so the structure of the light is kind of important to understand that, because the light comes from a source and goes to a destination, and then something happens to that light. And so we find out now that the speed of that light is not the fastest light, but we're not sure if that is a constant speed. So when we put the cups of life together, and remember, they were not the cups of the pandemic, they were made from physical elements, and we derived a GANS product from it. So this came from our inner space and our emotional strength. And each of us was more or less successful in producing the GANS material. And the reason for it is because the actual energy came from our core space. And so the cups of life had this GANS radiance manifestation of, we had the CO2 GANS and the calcium GANS, the zinc GANS, copper GANS. And poorly understood is the water GANS and the amino acid GANS. But when we look at the periodic table of elements and some of the things that are really, really important, of course, we started with the copper and the zinc, and the earth, of course, is iron, has an iron identity. And of course, we created magnesium and calcium, which helped us with our internal structures. But on this map, which we call periodic table of elements, we have a new player, and this is the gold. And just to show that we have now gone deeper, because, and we did skip silver, but what we're finding is that the gold is in the same column as copper. So we see that the copper GANS is a manifestation of the physicality, whereas the zinc GANS is an affinity for the emotional stability. So copper and gold are very physically specific, and the gold is certainly much more dense. And although the method of producing the gold GANS, this is another GANS that can be produced in the cup of life. But the quality of this gold GANS and the purpose of this gold GANS has many, many other uses, and is going to be a fundamental part, because let's face it, the copper is a fundamental part with respect to our physicality and understanding of physicality. And since the gold is more dense, we can understand that it'll be more impactful. So we have plenty of opportunities to discuss that in greater detail. What is very important is to clarify this terminology. So when we looked at the basic terminology of the X, Y, and Z axis, which every good carpenter knows, you need those 3 dimensions to build a house. But in physics, you have to have rotation, polarity, and field strength. So we see that there's a relationship between transmission, transition, and transmutation. So as we discussed for the last 18 weeks, we were talking about transmission and how we find that the X and Y and Z axis have to work together on the transmission dimension, because this is the medium, and the medium has to be there in order for a message to come across that medium. And the question then is, like, where's this message coming from? So we really have to change the dimension. And today we're going to change the X-axis transmission dimension and get into the X-axis transition dimension. And so, how can it be in 2 dimensions at the same time? Well, we're talking about a concept, and we're talking about the terminology and understanding that the X-axis is only one of the dimensions of the 3 dimensions when forces come together. And so we say, well, 2 forces come together. So we have an X-axis dimension and a Y-axis dimension. And so there is a transition. So we are talking about coming from one dimension to another dimension, but within that dimension, we have the formation of the X and Y dimensions. And if we understand the plasma rule, the higher strength field feeds the weaker strength field. And we see, of course, that when these 2 fields come together, basically, we're seeing a conflict point. So what we have to understand that this conflict point is also a point of deflection. But there's also a point of containment at that point of deflection. And so something is causing a transition here to change this transmission. So if the point of conflict is derived from the X-axis transmission, and this conflict point manifests, how does it become a point of containment? Well, this X-axis has to go through a transition. This is the basis of energy binding. And energy binding is very important because we all need it. We all need to bind our energies. It's a very self-serving point of view and very necessary. And since each of us needs this energy binding characteristic, when we steal this energy from others, in other words, we bind ourselves with energy that we've robbed from others, then there's a deficiency on their part. Ignoring the fact, of course, that there's a deficiency on our part as the thief, because we are getting energy from the lowest energy level. So the transmission of that energy is coming from a lowest source instead of us transitioning to a higher energy the way we did this. Well, the way we did this when we were born, of course. But, so that's from our point of view, but from the other's point of view, who we rob from, of course, now they are depleted. And will they transition to a higher energy supplementation, or will they stay at the same lowest transmission level and decide to either conflict with you or to steal from someone else? And this is the dilemma of men, because this is a transgenerational problem, and we're talking about thousands of years. So all of this is part and parcel of this field capture. So here we have this confusion where we have this x-axis transition, and it too has to go perpendicular to the ground, because the y-axis goes perpendicular to the ground, doesn't it? And then to facilitate the field capture, then we look at the z-axis transmission, and we have to decide, which ground are we working on? And, are we planting our feet squarely in midair? This becomes a real problem, because most of us plant our feet on the ground. Of course, it is possible sometimes to plant your feet on the ceiling, but what goes up comes down. And so these are just rules of physics. So we see the planes by axis, where we say the x-axis is the rotating field, and the y-axis is the polar field, and the z-axis is the field itself. So let's understand how this works. Well, here is a interesting picture coming from NASA. It shows Saturn's rings. And so these rings are visible. Being visible means that they are physical. But the planet itself is also visible. And the structure of the planet is clearly different from the rings. And in this picture, the planet casts a shadow on the rings. So not only is the planet physical, but the shadow is physical. It's a manifestation of the absence of light. And then when we look at the rings, there are gaps between the rings. And within the rings themselves, well, actually, there are layers. And then there's this huge gap between the rings and the planet itself. Let's look at Jupiter. And this is very interesting, because we have two pictures here. And what we're looking at here is between the top and the bottom pictures, it show a mosaic of images of Jupiter's rings. This was taken by NASA's Galileo spacecraft, which of course was traveling through in between space. Never ever traveled into outer space, but that's another subject. And so the planet itself is to the right of this mosaic, and you see the different brightness scales, how they accent different parts of the ring system. So the whole system of rings is called a ring system, and it has three parts. There's a flat main ring, a halo inside the main ring, shaped like a double convex lens, and the gossamer ring outside the main ring. So in the top view, you can see a faint mist of particles as it's seen from above and below the main ring. And this vertically extended halo is unusual in planetary rings and is caused by electromagnetic forces pushing the smallest grains, which carry electric charges out of the ring plane. Pretty good explanation. So when we look at the Earth space orbitals, we now understand that energy is coming in and it's absorbed, and that absorption manifests from the fields of attraction. So energy comes in and more comes in. So we call this attraction gravitational forces. But when we look at the repulsion of energy, and which we call emission, then that energy is emitted out, and more is emitted out. We call these field forces magnetical. And then we find beyond the magnetosphere, there's a vacuum. And of course, the basic x-axis is the equator, and inside the core is a vacuum. And so the question of where exactly are you in between these two vacuum characteristics are you positioned? And so this is all determined by susceptibility. So we call these susceptibility rings orbitals. But when we look at our motion orbitals on our Earth space, we don't see the travel that we do walking as traveling through an orbital. But let's face it, when you walk, whether you go up and down a hill or into a valley, you're always walking on the surface. So there is an energy that is flowing on this surface, and that keeps you there. So you become a satellite on that walking orbital. And of course, when there's water involved, then ships will float on the surface of the water. Well, that becomes the ship's orbital. So of course, we've now graduated that we can fly in planes, but commercial planes don't fly as high as warplanes. And so the flying in these planes is part of the motion orbitals. And then, of course, we have another area which we call the peace dome, which are the orbitals that the souls travel on. And beyond that are satellites. And those satellites stay within the motion orbitals of the Earth space. So if we were to go beyond that, well, we would get into the in-between space. And of course, there are no orbitals there. And this is where the rockets, shall we say, escape from what we call the Earth's gravitational force. So if we look at the gravitational force of the Earth as series of orbitals, and we see energy coming to the Earth from space, unidentified space, and so this is the principal matter. It's an energy parceling unit. It comes as an energy pack, and it comes to the convergence of all of these orbitals. And of course, it's coming from different directions. And the two primary directions that we're concerned with is the direction coming from the sun, and of course, the direction coming from the Earth. So when we're looking at the principal interaction, we see that there's always energy in motion, so it has to be what we call self-serving. So the sun has its own self-serving energy fields, and the Earth has its own self-serving energy fields. But the relationship between the two is a two-way street, and notwithstanding the fact that they are radically different in size, but in this picture, we want to show the connection and the interaction of those fields. And not only is there an interaction where energy is flowing, but it's a two-way street. And so somehow, some way, these streets have a divider. These streets have a containment. So when we understand attraction orbitals, we see that, well, basically opposite poles attract. So there's a coming together. But when there's a two-way street, that means there must be a repulsion gap. And in that repulsion gap must also be orbitals. Excuse me. And if we flip the poles and we create a new kind of attraction, so we see when you have like poles, there's repulsion. But how far do they repel? And they only go so far because there's an attraction gap orbital, which keeps it together. So which side are you looking at? Are you looking at the top view or the side view? So that becomes kind of the question. So when we're talking about rays and rays in motion, so they're fundamental for natural creation and natural decay, but we find that that goes in two directions. And so this becomes very, very important because in one direction, we have a balance between natural creation and natural decay. In the other direction, we have a balance between natural creation and natural decay. And so we have this nebulous boundary in between, and we can't pinpoint it, so we kind of fudge that. And we don't really know how these things stay together, so we fudge that as well. This is the bonding area between these two directions. So we have a containment of the individual orbitals, and we have a containment of natural creation and natural decay. And we have a containment on the one side or the other side of the bonding. And since it's a two-way street, we call it covalent bonding. But somehow, some way, there's a ray motion transition between these fields. Okay, well, there's also a radiance transition. In other words, when two fields come together, and we just said, okay, well, there's either attraction or repulsion, depending, but does that include each and every orbital? Does each and every orbital have to be like or opposite? And if we have fields that are not alike, does that mean that they are opposite? Or they're just not alike? And so when these fields come together, what portion of this radiance transition comes together to create this x-axis transition to a higher field strength? And what do you take into account? So as we've discussed over the years, we have a position of vision, we have an emotion of presence, and we are susceptible to an initiator. And so as a result, then, we manifest an emotion of vision. And this emotion of vision alters our emotion of position. And in that process, we have never given up our gravitational stability and our magnetical stability. So what we're saying is that that stability takes into account the entire picture. But at each and every one of these rings maintains its magnetical stability and gravitational stability relationship. And each group of rings, and so we have one group on the left and one group on the right, maintains collectively its magnetical stability and gravitational stability relationship. And then the coming together in a higher energy state, we have this in this picture, the motion of vision, that coming together has a magnetical stability and a gravitational stability. The question then becomes is what part of what we had at the lower energy state is conveyed to the higher energy state? So in other words, if we look at one ring and we see, well, there's this blue ring, and we look at the other ring and we see that blue ring is actually a red ring, and that's the only difference between the two. So we have a common denominator between these two rings of all the individual rings except for one ring. And so based on that, we assume that there is a common denominator and we're able to elevate to a higher energy state. And since these rings, regardless of the color of the ring, are all part of the x-axis transmission, in order to convey that to a higher energy state, there has to be an x-axis transition. So we talk about energy and motion being positive or negative, where the negative gives and a positive takes, and so these become the embodiment of flowing and binding principles of energy. But is that flowing on the x-axis transmission, or is it flowing on the x-axis transition? And where is it going, and where is it coming from? So we have to understand fundamentally that there are sequence orders. So we talk about the gravitational attraction as being a feedback, and a magnetical repulsion as being a feeding. So it all depends on your point of view, and you're the last man standing, and you have choices. You can either turn on or turn off this feeding. You can increase or decrease its strength, or you can enhance or diminish its positioning. And it's your responsibility. Uh-oh. So as we continue to refer to Mr. Herman Weyl, he says there's no such thing as one and the same energy which constitutes a charge at two adjacent increments of time. Each energy is different based on its position. So this is the embodiment of the principles of flow and connection. So in other words, if we're just spinning along atomically, we see that to maintain that, shall we say, mag-grav condition, we have to rotate the field and combine the dimension of the x-axis transmission, y-axis transmission, and z-axis transmission. But if we have the creation of a physicality, whether it's in a gaseous state or a liquid state or a solid state, or what if it's in a plasma state, all of these involve an x-axis transition. So when we look at water, which is a universal solvent, we find that basic component hydrogen, and it combines with oxygen. And clearly there's a big difference between the two. And so we have two hydrogens coming together with the one oxygen to, we say, be the fundamental parceling unit of water. And that forms a mag-grav, and it's round. And the question then becomes, how is it possible that these two tiny, really tiny hydrogens can balance off this big fat oxygen and still maintain this magrav and still be round? And it could be solid, liquid, or gaseous. And because it's able to shear off one of these hydrogens, which we call an electron, excuse me, that becomes a free hydrogen atom. And what's left behind is a hydroxyl. And now that we've lost some energy, we become negative as a unit. And this is now looking for a home. And it is this particular feature that makes water a universal solvent in every dimension. And we measure water by its pH. And the thing about this pH is that to go from each level of pH, there is a transition. One moment, please. So when we look at the difference between the levels of the pH, since it stands for potentiation of hydrogen, it means that the higher the pH, the greater the affinity for maintaining not only hydrogen, but also oxygen. So as we go down in pH, we tend to lose those. But the thing is, what happens in between? When does the pH of 7 become the pH of 8? Or when does the pH of 6 become the pH of 7? And we say, well, 7's the midpoint, but 6 is acidic and 8 is alkaline. So we find that something's affecting the susceptibility, but as we go below 7, that becomes more unstable. And as we go above 7, we become more stable. So if we become more stable, that becomes more gravitational. And if we become more unstable, that becomes magnetical. But in the process of becoming unstable, we still have to maintain the stability. So it's only a comparative, isn't it? So we could say that's a comparative stability or a comparative instability, but it's still stable. Oops. Well, let's look at the daisy. And if we look at the creation of protein, what is interesting in the daisy is at the center of the daisy, if you look, we have a hexagonal structure. Multiple hexagonal structures within a round field, and they're yellow or orange. And then there's a boundary. And then that boundary, there's a change in the physical structure, and there's a change in the color. And so these hexagonal structures become petals, and these yellow hexagonal structures become oblong. And they're much larger in terms of their totality. And all of a sudden, you can see these creases, which are comparatively straight, and in fact, more than one crease. And so we can talk about that another time, what I want to point out to you is that the physical manifestation of the core, the hexagonal structures, is different from the physical manifestation of the petals. But both are physical manifestations. So there must be a change in the energy, because the physical manifestation of the hexagonal structures in the center are part of the x-axis dimension. The physical structure of the petals are also part of an x-axis dimension. So how do you go from one x-axis transmission dimension to another x-axis transmission dimension without changing something? So there has to be an x-axis transmission. And so obviously in this case, initially there's an x-axis transition to an x-axis transmission of the hexagonal structure in the center. Then there has to be an x-axis transition and a new x-axis transition back to an x-axis transmission structure of the white petals. What we're looking at is two different x-axis transmission physical protein orbitals within the physical state, the lowest energy state. So we see the same thing day and night. We find that, well, the sun comes up in the morning and goes sets in the evening. And so we see that these daisies as flowers grow above the ground and they really respond to the sunlight. Whereas the roots grow into the ground, they don't see the sunlight. So they grow at night. So the energy that's coming in to facilitate the x-axis transmission comes from the sunlight, and therefore that x-axis transition is referenced to the sunlight. The root growth has the same characteristic, but a different x-axis transition, because that is reference to the earth. And so we can't see the earth light at night. We only see the sunlight in the daytime. So when we're talking about magnetic or gravitational stability, these orbitals manifest themselves in everything that we see. So whether it is within the cells, and so we start with a cell and they divide and multiply, and more cells and they get bigger as part of the growth. We see the Earth space orbitals likewise. And so there are rings, and there are definite parts of these rings. And since we see these rings, right, you can see the sky, you can see the ground, you can dig into the ground and you see there's a below the ground. So, all of these things are physical. They are all part of the x-axis transmission, but they're all different. And so in some way, the manifestation of these x-axis transmission zones had to be manifested via an x-axis transition. And this transition with respect to the Earth is between the vacuum of space and the vacuum in the core. And so coming in from the outside, we have our magnetosphere, we have our peace dome, and we have the soul of the Earth body in the biosphere range. This is our range, right? This is the where we operate. And then there's the magma, which is below, and then the soul of the Earth is in the core. And so we find from that core comes the emission of the soul. So this becomes the emission from the Earth space embodiment. And so we have these rings, and they are functioning exactly the same way as orbitals. It's just that on the surface of the ground, we walk along the orbital, satellites float above on the orbitals around the Earth. So we have other orbitals. They don't necessarily walk. We talked about gold and we talked about copper. Don't forget silver is in that category as well. And so these are basic Earth space elements, and they seem to follow an orbital path, but they don't exactly move the way we move. They don't flow the way water flows, and they're in different places. So, for instance, copper might be in Chile and gold might be in Indonesia. But then we have oil, which is not an element, and it's kind of all over the world. And we see the Earth space soul. That's not an element either, but it's all around the Earth. And then, of course, there's humanity, and we're not an element either. We're all around the Earth as well. So these are all overlapping Earth space orbitals, and they all maintain their integrity. So when we're looking at the solar radiance orbitals, they operate exactly like a ring. And so we say that the soul of man, that's the essential U, is the interaction between that plasmagen state and that mattergen state. And the soul of the body, well, that's a surrogate U. That's the interaction between the plasmagen state and the environment state, which is part of the small m matter state. And so one of the most important components is iron, and that iron is in our blood. And so when we look at the somatid orbitals, we see, well, first of all, there are little dots. Those are the somatids. Then we see these rings. Those are the blood cells. And then we see that there is a vacuum condition between the little dots, the somatids, and the big rings, the blood cells. And then we see that there's a vacuum inside the red blood cell as well. And when we say it's a vacuum in terms of not visible. So this is inside us. And yet there is a substance. There is a physicality. There is an x-axis dimension. And the x-axis dimension of the blood cell and the x-axis dimension of the somatid are two different dimensions. And we have seen the somatid manifest out of the blood cell. It's a product of the blood cell. So how did that happen? So in order for these two x-axis dimensions to manifest, there had to be an x-axis transition in between. And so we see the same thing with the GANs. We see that in the GANs, there's a gas in the center. It's a nanosolid, and it's puffy like popcorn. And it came from the cups of life, where we produced the physical components and we created this GANs, which is, none of us put the GANs in there. We created it from somewhere. The cup of life is an x-axis transmission. The GANs is an x-axis transmission, but the creation of the GANs had to go through an x-axis transition, didn't it? Because these are two different dimensions. And the same thing is true for the phospholipids. Look, there's an inside of the cell and an outside of the cell. And so these phospholipids are made up of hydrophilic and hydrophilic heads and hydrophobic tails. But there's a communication within the cell, and then there's a communication between cells. This is transmission. And there's no wires connecting. So somehow there has to be a communication transition. And we have the same when we look at our man space. We have the brain, we have the heart. They kind of work together. So we say, well, the transmission from the brain transitions to the heart. Well, this is good, but the heart transmits to the rest of the body. And then there's a blood-brain barrier. And that's kind of this vanishing point in between. And if we say the brain is a layer of operation, a ring, and the heart operates on a different ring, on a different orbital, and they clearly function differently. So with respect to the heart, the blood flows through the heart. With respect to the brain, the blood flows around the brain. So something has caused a difference there. And in our brain, we can create these ideas. So with these ideas, we have a birth of a concept. That's a new transmission. And so the idea is that a coexistence with the brain. And the fact that it's a coexistence means you're not left with a hole in the head when you have an idea. And so you can give an idea and not hurt. And so the brain is an orbital. The brain acts as a ring. And we use that to reason. And that reason becomes a physical expression feedback, a feedback of our environment. So we transcribe these concepts, and the ideas become conceptualized. In other words, they become born. So these ideas are working within a framework of a concept manifestation. And our dream memories are ingrained. But which dream memories are we talking about? Because when we go to sleep, many of us can remember our dreams. We leave the body and the soul goes traveling through another layer, but the soul is not traveling in its physicality. The physicality is left behind, and if the soul leaves, who's minding the fort? Is it the soul of the body? Or does the soul of the body dream with the soul? And so clearly there's a transmission, but it's clearly at a different energy state. And so when we try and graph these things and we say, well, let's look at the three dimensions and we'll see how things move along or how they roll along or spin along, what they get from here to there. And so we can create this sine wave, but the thing is that sine wave goes in two directions. So could we say that there's a transition connection by the flipping of the poles? But clearly, again, clearly, the connection is going in the opposite direction. So not only is the connection flipped over, but the direction of the connection. So if we go down the sine wave, we will go down and to the left. But if we go up from the sine wave, we'll go up and to the right. So not only is it opposite up and down, but left and right. And so if it's a two-way street, then that two-way street goes, instead of up and down, goes down and up. And instead of left to right, it goes from right to left. And so these become transition connections. Well, how do we decide? So if there's a two-way transmission, okay, well, that's fine if we just stay within those two dimensions, but each of these dimensions could be a two-way street, and each street could go in two directions. And on that street, we could have two sizes. So, we have variables, we could say at least two or more. And then each of these on the street can have two lanes. So this is all part of the two-way transmission. And we're only talking about the x-axis transmission on the lowest energy state. But what if we go to a higher energy state? Well, we're going to have to do this x-axis transition so that we can continue this two-way transmission. So we need to understand that there is a transmission spectrum. And so if we understanding that the spectrum is involving with orbitals, so then when we look at the light, which is our point of containment, because that's visible, and that visible band is right in the visible light spectrum, right in the center of the picture. But there's a beyond on one side, and there's a beyond on the other side. One side on the infrared, one side on the ultraviolet. And so there has to be a transition of these transmission spectrums because each spectrum works within its own orbital. So in other words, radio waves are different from X-rays, and X-rays are different from gamma rays. And so they have their own spectrum, non-visible. And so there has to be a transition from spectrum to spectrum. And this is the difference between the surface superficiality and the internal substance. In other words, the superficiality pertains to the physicality, but the physicality depends on the plasma substrate. And then the two come together, that becomes your point of containment. And understand that that point of containment is within that transmission spectrum. And then, of course, there's always one step beyond. So when we're looking at these transmission orbitals, we understand that they function with communication and requires an antenna, not a map. And if we understand the giving and take of energy, then the release of the binding energy has to proceed before the retrieval of the beneficial energy. The field release has to precede the field capture. The giving has to precede the taking. The emission has to precede the absorption. Motion cannot exist without coexistence because emotion is a product of existence. And motion and coexistence reside in both matter states. So the transmission can work in both matter states. And to go from one matter state to another matter state for the transmission dimension has to go through transmission transition. And so we don't do this by bending the antenna or tying it into a pretzel. We just do this tuning, right? We turn the knob on the radio to change the channel. Well, so we have this plasma dominant tuning, and that has to precede the physical dominant tuning. And so we're talking about these various dimension orbitals, and we find that man space is not the center of the universe. And it could be Earth space from our point of view, but then there's a sun space dimension as well. But what we do know is that the containment is dimension centric, and the proximity is dimension centric, and the nature of pressure is dimension centric. So these dimensions are the three transmission dimensions. And so we ask, well, what's the message? And how is that message contained? Well, before we answer that, we have to decide which transmission dimension orbital are we talking about, right? Because in both cases, what we've seen in terms of changing these physical energy states and these physical dimensions, there had to go through an x-axis transition. And when we went from one ring to another ring, we always had this feedback summary where we saw the sound and light and heat and pressure change. We saw the luster, the superficiality, and the laminar containment. And so these are all x-axis transmission dimension transitions. And so this feedback summary becomes our dominant way of operating. So when we're searching for outer space and we're trying to realize what is the difference between materialization and dematerialization, so there's somewhere has to be a transition zone. That transition zone is the reality dimension. And this goes from this gravitational Earth space to that transparency point. That subspace, that magnetical subspace, which for us is gravitational. Wherever you are, you have to cross over an x-axis transition. And so there's a difference between the matter plasma dimensions. One is physical and one is plasmatic. The physical's the feedback. It's the plasmatic that's the feeding. And our problem is that we're feedback dominant. So we are an antenna. We are getting the message from the feeding manifestation, wherever that comes from, and we're getting this feedback from wherever we choose to feedback from. And our point of view is a transmission tuning transition. And this has not been researched well enough. So the Keshe Foundation is launching a Keshe Space Plasma research team opportunity. And because we're in the post-March 15th era, March 15th, 2024, where we have choices on how to manifest in this beautiful Earth space, this bountiful space that's between outer space and this graceful space, our inner space. And for 533 weeks, we have been seeking to facilitate this greater oneness in the understanding of these knowledge seekers workshops that transcend the limitations of nuclear science. This is the plasma science. And this is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute teachings on plasma science. Welcome, all the beautiful knowledge seekers. There's gold in them dar hills. I wonder how the subtitles will work with that one. The World Peace Treaty needs to be signed because that is the ticket. That is the ticket to every x-axis transition. Sign it. Sign it with a pen. Sign it with your heart. Sign it with your brain. Sign it with your soul. But sign it with sincerity. And we wonder, is man the reactor of a three-dimensional universe? And can man find heaven through the field transition? Or does man have to go out of his mind to go into outer space, mining the orbitals of the three dimensions of truth? Is what we really have to do, because the message manifestation comes from various orbitals of physical dimensions. plasma science needs to continue to be delivered daily in exchange for peace on Earth. So welcome to the new outer space age. I hope you enjoyed this trip. Thank you very much for allowing me to present.
Well, thank you very much, Alex. Where do we find the gold in them hills? That's what I'm trying to find out. Did you like the gold amino acids Mr. Kesh was showing? I see you have that as a background image there. That's quite an interesting creation, where he said it would not only feed you, but it would provide you with energy. It would also provide you with this emotional balancing that you wouldn't want to seek power. You wouldn't be looking for leadership and the rest of this. So this is, again, a very interesting entity that's been created. And I think he talked about selling it for $1,000 a gram, but I'm thinking they can deliver this, and maybe they already have in the system that they're using to feed or to deliver medicine, energy, and emotional balancing. But he actually physically applied some of this material to the interviewer. And apparently she felt more energy. I know Mr. Kesh said his fingers were tingling just holding on to this. So this is another new, not well, new for us in a way, but there's more than gold in them there hills, huh?
So I think all of us have got a little bit of tingling from the nano-coated copper. So because the gold is more dense, much more tingling is available.
Claudia and Selena have thanked you for your teaching today. This was an interesting picture that was shared last Friday. I thought you, whoops, not that one. I need to actually take the screen. Let me make sure I have the picture here, and then I'll just share the screen if I can, and you can take it right back. But I thought this was very similar to what you were. In a way, you can see the structure of the light. This was a picture taken in London when someone was out on a lunch break, and this sort of image appeared in the clouds. Very rare, I would say, but almost as if the plasma became an elongated neutron and then either was traveling or arriving at its point of destination. Do you see any similarities there, Alex?
You're asking me?
Okay. But isn't that a very unique picture? How the plasma could become this elongated neutron, travel to its point of destination, and then return to the spherical plasma at the point of destination. So
Well,
you
it does
see this
remind
little
me.
cloud here, very similar to the elongated neutron, let's say.
Well, it reminds me of chalk on a blackboard when you come with a brush and you kind of rubbed all the chalk off, and then you might hit the blackboard with the brush.
Oh, the smudge, yes. Yes,
Leave
where
it,
sometimes
leave it.
they clean them that way. They sort of tap them on the board or something. You're talking about the eraser.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. Very interesting. So apparently this person was working for a defense technology company at the time and just happened to look up while they were out sitting for lunch and to see this beautiful formation happen right above them, almost directly above them, almost as if saying, would you like to go for a ride? I see Claudia has her hand up. Go ahead and take the screen back, Alex. I think unless you had more comment on this.
Sure, I'll take it back.
Hello, hello, Alex.
Hello, Claudia.
Oh, Yeah.
Hello, Mark. Uh, Thank you for your teaching today. Open my mind of every time we speak. Many things I don't understand, but some some pieces I'm growing up. Two things that I make notes here. Uh, One is that you said three types of containment. This was very interesting, but in my mind, I don't realize I don't do like an image of this. If you can explain more this. Another question that I have I have is how do for example I have experiences in my life such as my vision. Every day I wake up and see with my eyes, and how can I amplify the diameter of the rings of the emotions of my soul? I think that what you explained facilitates the race to go into this field, these rings, and reduce the repulsion that I think will increase, will expand my soul. But how can I do this if my life is like a routine? Of course, I can change my behavior. I can change the things that can I eat, can I drink, but to change the rings, the diameter, I don't know what can I do. This is the two questions. Thank you, Alex.
More tough questions from Claudia. Okay.
Oh my God, sorry.
Oh, you get all the easy ones, Alex.
Yes, about the tree containment, please.
Well, in the beginning, okay, so let's look at this one here. For instance, I find this one like particularly interesting because NASA has explained the manifestation of these photos in a way, and if you see the three fields, so you know we talked about what is it, the main ring, the gossamer wing, the double convex lens. So, or that would be the just a moment. It's a main ring, a halo ring, and a gossamer ring. So, in order to physically manifest, you have to have three dimensions. So, in other words, every manifestation likewise has to have three dimensions. The comment on whether or not you need to expand your field is really up to you. There is no rule that says, you know, bigger is better. Only in Texas is that important. And because in Texas, everything is big. But what is important is to maintain this field. And in order to maintain that field, you have to have an end and a beginning. But that end is not rock solid, because if you were to say that that end is rock solid, then if you go, say, on a beach or in a gravel pit and you see a bunch of rocks together, each rock is rock solid, but each rock is an individual rock. So the manifestation of that rock is within a containment. And regardless of the shape of that rock, everything within that rock is a balanced field of magnetical gravitational field forces. So how can that rock nestle up against another rock and still be a rock? Why doesn't it blend together? So another rock that we know is like sugar. Sugar comes in a crystal. But when we put sugar as a cube, where all the sugar is an individual grain, but we compact it together so it makes a cube, and we put it in warm tea or warm coffee, it dissolves. So at that point, it no longer has its containment. What would happen if you took a stone and put it in your tea? Well, it would sink to the bottom and you'd see it. And you wouldn't like that. But we put the sugar in and it dissolves and you can't see it. You still see the tea. Well, the thing is that when you drink that tea, the taste has changed. So that means despite the fact that the sugar is inside the sugar maintains its sweetness. So in other words, the sugar maintains its containment despite the fact that it is dissolved within the tea. And the sugar obviously was a cube or even a spoonful, and you put that in the tea. So therefore, the tea in the cup was bigger than the sugar because you put the sugar into the tea. Once the sugar became part of the tea, now the sugar became bigger. So the size of the field of the sugar changed. The size of the tea field did not change. The sugar and the tea blended together. So what does that mean? That means there are gaps in the tea to accommodate the sugar. So you now have the two together. And then when you drink, what are you drinking? You're drinking the tea and extracting the energy from the tea. And you will extract the energy of the tea and the energy of the sugar. And you will be able to do that based on its physical spectrum. Excuse me. It would have to be its plasmatic spectrum, because it is not going through, you don't have a mouth inside your stomach. It goes through the lining of the stomach and is absorbed into the body. Then something happens to that energy where it has to manifest into a GANS. So you have this sugar, which is in an x-axis dimension. You put it in the tea, it becomes a liquid. It has to go through an x-axis transition. You drink it, it has to go through another x-axis transition, goes inside your body, and goes into another x-axis transition back into a GANS. And we know that it's coming down because the GANS is in a physical state. But we don't see the GANS until that GANS interacts with the environment. Because at that point in time, the GANS is within the environment of the skin. So it remains in a plasmatic state. So this is the key point now. From that plasmatic state, it can contribute to your overall energy field. And so your energy field then becomes more dynamic. And that field then becomes the carrier for whatever you want to emit. So the size of the field does not necessarily mean the strength of the field. The size of the field is the density of the field, which is to say, a plasma field of gold will have the same will be more dense than the plasma field of copper because it has a greater mass. Will it be bigger? Well, not necessarily, but it certainly will be stronger because it has more of a gravitational field force. So the strength is different from the size. The field manifestation is different from the physical manifestation. And so the rule, as we need to understand in the plasma state, is the higher strength feeds the lower strength. So the problem comes in our understanding when we look at gold, let's say, or another metal, and we want to produce something. So we diminish its size and make something else out of it. We have to go through different energy levels. So if it's a metal, we have to melt it down and then reform it, reshape it, and we take a part of that, just a part of that. So we're able to manipulate the physicality. And we say, okay, by applying heat, I can change that physicality into a liquid. And so we say, okay, well, that's an x-axis transition. How do we change that liquid back into a solid? And so we say, well, we let it cool off. What does that mean? It cools off. Well, cold is not a feeling. Cold is the absence of heat. The presence or absence of heat is the feeling. So cold itself is not a feeling, but we say it's a feeling, okay? It's like hate. We say, oh, well, you hate. Well, that's the absence of love. So you either have love or you don't have love. Because energy is always positive. So you cannot have a negative energy. You either have it or you don't have it. That's the bottom line. And the way you give it and the way you take is entirely your choice. So the size of the field is not the determining factor. It's the field strength in combination with your intention that is the determination. And you can change your determination because the field strength is only the medium. It's your intention, which is the message. And so we do need these three dimensions to maintain a containment, and our intention is part of that containment. So how does that containment maintain its containment and ride the three dimensions of containment? Well, this is where the new plasma science has gone into. And so, as we said earlier on, the dilemma that we have with our transmutation is that if we go alone, we want to maintain that containment. In other words, when we dissolve into that plasmatic state, we want to maintain our physical state because that physical state is our state. But we don't need to contain the boo-boos because those boo-boos are all part of the interaction with our environment. What we do want to take with us is the memory, the learning, the life's learning lessons, which are added to our fundamental RNA, which comes along as part of the gamma ray, as part of the cosmic ray. So when we transmute, we want to take that additional knowledge and add it to that knowledge that we were born with. If we don't do that, then we will transmute as a baby, like we did to this planet. We were born as a baby. You weren't born as an adult. You grew into an adulthood, but you grew into it within the earth space. And you grew that with your intention. And you grew that as beautiful as you are because of your intention. That was you. That was you decided to grow that way. But there's a reason. There's a reason why. And you know, this is the fulfillment of your intention. And that is yours, not mine. But if you want to leave, you want to go with that full intention, and you want to add all the life experiences that you have. So that's what life is all about, is learning those lessons. Now, if you don't learn those lessons, then you have to go back to the basics. And then this is where the problem comes in for a lot of people, because by drawing the energy from the lowest energy state, which is robbing, cheating, stealing, lying at the expense of others, not only did you not get enough energy, but the quality of the energy that you got was the worst quality possible, because it wasn't representative of the original intention that caused you to be born here. So now let's add something to this. In the process of transmutation, are you able to add more knowledge? Well, why not? In the process of transmutation, will you not engage with other cosmic rays? To go from here to there, you have to go through this transition zone. The physical movement or the plasmatic movement, which is the same, requires the interaction of energy, the emission and absorption of energy. And you have to emit before you absorb. So in the process of emission, you create a vacuum in the direction that you're going. And the structure follows. And then once you assume that new position, you absorb the energy that is related to that position, and you keep on going. Give and take, give and take, give and take, give and take until you get your destination. And then what you do is you give to that destination everything that you want. And then at that point, you can choose whether or not to maintain your plasmatic dimension of 3 dimensions, or if you want to downgrade, decay, in other words, to a physical dimension. The difference in our terminology is that decay has a negative connotation, but it is a form of creation, and it is a gift. It is a very special gift. And so if we are allowed to understand that, and we've, generally speaking, only had one generation to discuss this, because the previous generation has passed on. Well, the hindrance of disseminating this information has been a transgenerational thing. But we have gotten this information because this information that we were born with came through our parents, which came through our grandparents. So we actually did get this information in a transgenerational basis, but we are physically dominant. We see that we take our physicality and then we want to create something out of it. There's nothing wrong with that. We're not going to scrap that education. That is a very, very valuable education and a very valuable contribution to humanity. This is all part of the growing and learning cycle. So this is not to be discarded. what is to be discarded is the wrong understanding, the misunderstanding, or the haphazard teaching that has come along, because whether it's willful or accidental, it sends us down the wrong path of understanding, and it creates a picture that then is actually false. And the only time we find out is when we test it. And if you keep testing it and you find, well, it doesn't work, either you're not doing it correctly, or either you're not interpreting the information correctly, or the information that you have received has been wrong in the first place. And we have arrived at that shocking conclusion that that information is at the wrong place. So back in 1991, after my family was struggling with cancer, and then we got rid of the cancer within 8 weeks, well, guess what? What we were doing for 8 years was not working. And what we did for 8 weeks was working. So what am I supposed to do at that point? Am I supposed to say, well, we're now going to go back to the system that wasn't working? Well, that doesn't make any sense. And so we need to break this transgenerational habit and stop doing the things the way they were being done, because that is the result that we have. So if you want to change the result, we have to change the way we're doing things. And the first way that we have to do this is from our soul. So let's reverse this physically dominant thing and understand that we are soul dominant. And from there, we just progress. So thank you for a lovely question. I hope this answer made sense to you.
Yes, much more. Thank you so much. Thank you. I will listen again. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to join the conversation? Come on in, the water's fine. If we're traveling in this dimension of energy, Alex, would we see the rings of Saturn or the rings of Jupiter? It seems like it's an instantaneous travel. Now, yes, we may encounter some cosmic rays or other energy packs as we travel, but from the point of leaving to the point of destination seems like it would be instantaneous. And if you're in the dimension of energy, would there be any interaction in the matter state? As he said, if you travel in the dimension of the matter state, what do you see in the universe? You see the citizens of the universe and their craft. If you travel in the dimension of energy, you interact with their souls. So would we see any of this matter state? It would seem like it would just go by in less than the blink of an eye, in a way. Maybe 20 seconds or something along that line, but it wouldn't be much time for sightseeing, would there be? In the dimension of energy, you leave and you arrive almost instantaneously.
You're incorrigible. You know, you ask one question and you combine 4 questions in the same question. So the original question as far as would you see the rings of Saturn if you were on Saturn? Yes, of course, because those rings, in terms of its physicality and in terms of its visibility, would manifest in the physicality. And they haven't changed. You know, you've changed your position, but the rings haven't changed in terms of their manifestation, because their manifestation preceded your arrival. Okay, so their manifestation came from the manifestation and interaction of the Saturn and the Sun.
Right, but let's say we were going way past Saturn and Jupiter. I mean, we were going far out into the galaxy somewhere. Would we actually see any physicality?
You would have to see in the other dimension. but the method of seeing would be the same. So when you're looking at the visible spectrum, you're within a contained range. So let's look at this again. So it's a very good question. Don't get me wrong here. So when we're looking at that point of containment and physicality, we're looking at the visible light source. And then if we go into another dimension, and that dimension has to be in a energy state that is a point of containment, it is going to have to stay within the spectrum. And so your capabilities of seeing that would also change. Remember that the visibility that's in your eye is restricted to the interaction of these rays with the rods and cones in your eye. The rods and cones diverge and converge the energy in such a manner that they create a picture in your mind's eye, and then you physically manifest that as a concept in your mind, and you may actually be able to draw that in how you see it. But your mind's eye and the mind's eye of a camera in the physicality would do the same thing. But how come there's another mind's eye under the somatoscope? And why is this not in every hospital? And because it's looking at a live blood culture, and it is the amalgamation of two visible sources of light. So the combination of these two visible sources of light give you these shadows. And it's these shadows as they move, and they're definitely going to move with the relationship of whatever is in there that is moving and is going to mimic that. So, you can shake the table, or you can, bang the drums or whatever you want, but you're not going to change the movement of these things with the physicality, because these somatids and these blood cells are manifesting on their own. Now, in terms of emotion, because of the environment, which is a liquid, that will carry another emotion. And so that emotion will be affected. How do you know that? Well, you listen to a song and you may be happy, you may be sad, you may be tapping your toe, or you may become very nostalgic. But, and that can only affect you if you allow it. And so that becomes, your decision on that. But if you go outside of this visible range, then, you can't even see it. And you will have to have other visible means. Those visible means will be within your 3 dimensions of existence. So will that existence be in a physical state, or will it be in a plasmatic state? That field strength that you manifest in will have a common denominator with others who are in that same field strength. And so those universal beings which are residing in that field strength are manifest in those 3 dimensions of that field strength, and they will definitely make themselves visible to you in that field strength, because you will have the capability of seeing them in that field strength. You won't be depending on the rods and cones in your eyes that you did in the lower energy state of the physicality. Does that make sense?
Somewhat, yes. No
Well, what I'm
problem.
trying to answer
Thank
your
you.
question is a
Yeah.
yes, and say that, you will be able to see them. Now, I don't know if you'll be able to sit down and have a coffee with them, but this is one of the nostalgic things that I'm having difficulty with, is if we travel through outer space and it's instantaneous, you know, you just don't have time to make the coffee, let alone sit and enjoy the coffee. So, and this is a feature that we have in the physicality, isn't it? You know, where you get together and you go to the cafe, more so in Europe, that it's almost mandatory. So this is a way of life, and it's nice. You know why? You know, you're busy, 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 and then you say, oh, you know, let's take a break and let's go for a sandwich and a coffee, you know, at the local place, and just to break up the routine, and it's part of the entertainment of and interest of living. But if we go into outer space, well, we won't have that thing. So the question that's on my mind, and probably part of the question that you just asked, what are we going to do for entertainment? You know, if we get there and we get there instantaneously, you know, is there a rest period? Do we need a rest period? Or what do we do then? Do we just have a quick look around and say, oh, well, this is not exactly what I intended. Let's go to another place. So I can't answer these questions because I personally haven't experienced it, except to know that, well, when I go to sleep and my soul goes traveling, at least it comes back. And and sometimes it's not altogether happy when it comes back. And they say, well, what's wrong? Well, you know, I was enjoying the trip and now I have to get back into the physicality because you need to get up. Well, so sorry, you know, but anyway, our kind of life and our quality of life is going to be different. But fundamentally, it's going to be better because it will be peaceful. It'll be a refuge. That's the way life operates. That's the way the universal community operates. But we need to straighten out this problem on Earth. And it's been going far too long. And it's affecting the neighborhood.
Very good, Alex. Thank you. Thank you for
Hi.
addressing that.
Hello, Mark. Hi,
Is this
Alex.
Selena?
Yeah.
Hi
Can I
there.
say something? Hello.
Yes.
I want to talk about one old story, right? I told before, but I want to say again. And then after that, I will say another thing. First, the story. I told I had experience long time ago. It was a vision, and I felt I am in the cloud. I am cloud. So I'm in the sky, I'm cloud, I'm moving round and round. And after that, other cloud joining with me. And then there is lots of cloud, lots of soul. I know those are not cloud, single cloud. Those are soul like me, being like me. But I'm cloud, they're cloud. We are moving, going round and round the sky. And then I was happy. I was not thinking anything, just enjoying. And then suddenly I look down and then I see the small houses and the land and everything, earth, land. So my mind, I just suddenly, oh, I am telling me, oh, I am going round and round. It will make a tornado, and then under there is people, there is land, there is houses, everything will be destroyed. When I thought that, and I know before I had a lot of experience about those kinds of stuff. If I think about like human, like a problem, think about this problem, that problem, they don't keep me in there. They they knock me down. So I'm saying myself, oh, I'm thinking that right now they will kick me out from here. And then they did. I went to the deep sleep, from meditation to deep sleep for a few minutes and then woke up. So that's why I know if we don't stay this dimension, if we go to other dimension, our thought and emotion will be different. We can stay there with this in this emotion, like we can think our problem and we can go other places. No, there is no way. And then Gloria is talking about something, asking about going other dimension, not doing anything. Doing anything, we can go anywhere. We have to not do anything, not think anything. That way we can go. It's like a light air, like a cloud, something. We have to be light. We don't have to think about anything, and we don't have to do anything. And if we blend with our universe and our environment, will go further. And that way we go other dimension. It is not doing anything. It is not doing anything. And I don't know.
Yeah,
I
it
did
does seem
explain
like the soul takes over in a way and decides what to absorb or what energies are needed and the rest of it. I think that was part of the teaching in the 533rd one. Anyone want to make a comment? I noticed Karina has put something in the chat. Speechless, silent. Thank you, Alex. 512 Knowledge Seekers Workshop equals 8 by 8 by 8. Listen many times. It's a jewel for all of us. Love you all. Anything you want to share on that, Karina? I know Karina's a space traveler. We met in London. And is there any point there you want to mention or what stood out for you in that workshop?
Can I share one
Sure.
dream? It was like 2 weeks ago. I had the dream. It's not special, but different. I went to the sometimes big palace, they make motel or something, hotel resorts. People go there and pay money and can live. So
Yes.
those kinds of places, yeah, I went there with my husband, and then it was a big palace, like house, old design, and there is a balcony, a big balcony, and then there is a sitting chair and a lot of stuff. So I'm enjoying in the chair, sitting in there. And then my husband left me over there, and then he went somewhere else. And then a few minutes later, he come back with a cab. So I didn't feel good. Oh, he leave me alone in here, and he went outside and come back. And then I'm telling him, oh, I don't want to stay here. Let's go home. And then he said, okay, let's go. So I went home, and then my neighborhood, the resorts, and then my house is not that much far. It is like the same city, same place, same, not too much far. So those are hilly area, some small hilly area, and the houses is some of them in the down to the hill, and some of the high top of the hill, like those kinds of house. And then there is no fences in any houses, all open land. So I'm doing something in my front of my house. I'm doing something, I think maybe planting or pruning something a little bit far away from my door. So suddenly one dog, big dog, look like dog, but it is not dog, big size, and it ran nearby me and went to my house. My house, and then other house is running around and jumping. He jumped to the trying to get in, and some lower land house. He went to the top of the roof and doing something like crazy. And then I'm looking at the door in front of my house, and I'm talking with somebody, maybe our neighborhood, some neighbor. I'm talking to the one lady. I didn't look at her, but I'm listening her, what she's saying. I'm saying, she's saying, oh, it is not dog. You are looking dog, but it is not dog. So I told her, ask her, what is that then? And she said, it is those kinds of thing. It is not from art. And I say, and the lady is telling me, we have to leave. We have to leave the city. We have to empty everything. And I ask her, oh, in the China, there is this empty city or empty something neighborhood. There is a big building and everything is empty. Is there anybody like those? And she's saying, yes, they live there. When they came, and then they emptied everything. And we have to empty everything right now because they're here. That is my dream. And then I ran to the house and going inside.
They certainly can seem mixed up, can't they? With all kinds of things that we don't expect in these interactions. Yes.
Yeah.
Sometimes they do make sense, and other times you wonder what is the meaning of this.
Yeah, you can find it if you want to understand. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Selena. Karina, is there anything you'd like to add on this 512 that you're encouraging us to listen to? It's a jewel for all of us. If not, that's fine. Oh, I saw she left and came back and apparently left again. No problem.
Mark, can I just take this opportunity to thank everybody for allowing me to continue to present? And I want to thank everybody on this panel for being part of the new teachers. The new knowledge seekers will be grateful for your presence. Thank you all.
Yes, I think if one of these or multiple things drop in the marketplace, we're going to have a lot of hungry knowledge seekers looking to gain an understanding of this. And so we're getting positioned to be able to answer perhaps some of their questions and share our understanding and what we've absorbed over these months and weeks and years to help them enlighten themselves or become elevated. But I think the new type of teaching, it's more of a transfer of this higher energy. Apparently you come in contact with some of these cosmic rays, it's an automatic increase in your intellectual ability as well as the elevation of the soul. They probably go hand in hand in a way, but it just seems like this is the new dimension of teaching. By placing you in a higher energy, or you're interacting with higher energies, you become more enlightened, you become more knowledgeable. This is what I'm seeing, rather than spending time reading a book or looking or writing or listening to someone teach. I don't know, how do you feel about that, Alex? Is there a shortcut to this whiteboards and telegrams method of teaching?
Definitely. You've touched on a very important point, because if life is for learning, then everything that we learn is within our life. So your life is different from my life, right? And if you notice that one of the benefits of YouTube is that there are a lot of people who are posting skills on there. And so, you know, I was one of those city guys, and I didn't really get to live in the country until my 30s. And I realized at that point in time how little knowledge I had. Because I had the big city knowledge, which was very little knowledge. And, you know, you live on a farm, well, you better learn how to make things work. And, you know, when I didn't have the benefit of YouTube at that time. And now anything that I want to know, you know, how to lay a floor, how to change a tire, you know, how to change a spark plug, how to change a light bulb, anything you want to know, someone somewhere has uploaded something on YouTube to share that knowledge. Now, you know, albeit they're looking to cash in on that knowledge, but you know, in the meantime, it's an education. So that transcends your lifetime. So that's your experience. You know, you say, well, the only time that I'm going to learn how to change a light bulb is when I get up on the chair and I unscrew the light bulb and I screw a new one back in. Well, you don't have to stand up on the chair and do that. You can learn from this video. Okay, so I may still go through life and never change a light bulb. But what I'm saying is that I will have gained the knowledge from that simply by having a sharing with someone else of their knowledge. Okay, so that is contributing to my learning curve. And so if life is for learning, life is for learning my own experience, and life is for learning from other people's experience. And when you combine that, then a synergy develops. Well, what you touched on is the ability to be able to get a knowledge that is beyond that. And when we say beyond that, well, that's the knowledge that we were born with. We had to have that knowledge because we were born as a baby, and frankly, we had no learning experience of life, what we call a life learning experience, because we were just born. So life learning experience is something that is acquired. Well, how do you get life learning experience that you weren't born with? And it isn't part of the life learning experience that you have in the physicality. What happens if that life learning experience is the additional knowledge that is coming from the universe? Or let's paraphrase this.
Or we're carrying in our RNA, and maybe these high energies just unlocks it in a way.
Well, wait a second.
Okay.
Yes, no, you're correct. That is a excellent point. But the assumption is that if we, in our physicality, are learning because of our life experience, wouldn't it make sense that what you just talked about, the learning of the universe and the additional knowledge of the universe, is also expanding? Wouldn't that make sense? Is the knowledge of the universe finite, or is it expanding?
Endless, yes.
So therefore, it would have grown. And if you're only getting the knowledge that you get from YouTube and from your life experience, we're completely missing out on this additional knowledge that is being conveyed. Would you agree with that?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I found a little saying. I write down these sayings and then I find them and lose them. The more we understand the totality, the more we realize we know nothing. That was one of Mr. Keshe's statements. And even the creator is still learning. So that should put us in a humble position for at least a day or two.
Well, there you go. So there's the statement. That's the answer to the question. So if the creator is passing on this knowledge to us, And, you know, we've stopped learning at the point that we were born, then everything that the creator is feeding us is going in literally one ear and out the other, passing through like a gamma ray. And we're not gathering any of that knowledge. It's not that he's not delivering it, he's delivering it, but you know, we're not tuned in. And if we could tune in and add to that knowledge,
Absolutely.
then right?
Yes, yes.
And if I may add just one more point, and that is that the knowledge that we gained as a life experience, we also share, but that's done automatically. We don't have to go into a special room like a living room or a kitchen or a bathroom and say, well, that room is designated for that function. We don't have to go into a knowledge transmission room. We don't have to go into a bed to sleep. Okay? We exist and we are always connected. And so the better the connection, the better the transmission. Thanks very much, Mark.
That was a grand slam this time, Alex. Very nice.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Mark. Great teaching today.
Okay.